What's up guys, Sagi here and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk Live. Today we're going to check out the all-new Canon 90D. This is a new DSLR camera from Canon. It's designed to replace the really popular 80D, which has been a video and vlogging workhorse for the last couple of years. I'm just going to take a moment, let me know if the audio sounds good, if you can hear everything, that would be really helpful. And I'm unboxing this one, but I already used the 90D for a couple of days at a Canon event a few weeks ago. So I do have a couple of days of hands-on experience that I'm going to share with you. And then after doing this video, I'm going to use it for a couple more weeks and then publish one of my more detailed reviews. And there are a lot of things that I really like about this camera, and then there are also some things that were disappointing, to be honest. I'm going to share as many of them as I can during this live show, and then hopefully I can help you decide whether or not this is a good option for you. There's also been a lot of discussion over the last couple of months about whether there's even room for a DSLR camera in today's mirrorless dominated market. And with this release, it looks like Canon is hedging its bets on yes. Now, when you talk to Canon, they say that they're selling a lot more DSLRs than they are mirrorless cameras, which makes sense because up until very recently, Canon didn't have a lot of great mirrorless cameras, and they have a ton of DSLRs. So as a function of sheer volume, it makes sense that they're selling more DSLRs. I mean, they're great cameras, even inexpensive cameras like SL2 or an SL3. Obviously, all the 5Ds were super popular. So I'm not surprised at that. But again, that's part of the conversation that I want to have today about, would you actually consider buying a DSLR camera right now? This, like I said, the 90D has some really powerful features that we're going to talk about. And so let's go ahead and start taking. We'll talk about those things, and then I'm also going to talk about a couple of features. So just as quick highlights, the 90D has a 32.5 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor. We've got dual pixel autofocus, which is awesome. We're getting finally uncropped 4K. I mean, it is on an APS-C sensor camera, but it's uncropped, so you don't get that extra 1.7x crop. We have 120 frames per second for slow motion, a fully articulating touchscreen, and there's a ton more that we're going to talk about. So there are some really good specs, but one of the things that I'm going to do is I want to cover how those specs actually relate to real life use, because when you're just reading the specs, you're not really getting the whole story, and you'll see with some of these specifically why I'm saying what I'm saying. So, and the next thing I want to do is I want to take a minute and thank those of you who are supporting me on Patreon. I have a new Patreon page. There's a link to it in the description and on my profile page. So thank you very much. I'm really trying to grow the channel with more reviews and live shows and tutorials. So anyone that supported me with a super chat or on my Patreon page, thank you very, very much. All right, so if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the live chat if you're watching this live, and if you're watching a replay of this show, I do my best to answer every question that I can, so you can just go ahead and drop them in the comment section below, and like I said, I'll do my best to answer the questions. All right, so let's go ahead. I'll throw the specs on the screen so that they'll cover a lot of your questions. And let's go ahead and open this up. So I haven't even opened this box. Like I said, I've used the camera before, but not this particular one. So kind of excited I didn't get to unbox it. So first things first, we've got a charger. So great. I really am frustrated when manufacturers don't include a charger. Even if I can charge the battery in the camera, I still like to have a charger so that when I buy additional batteries, I can have them charge while I'm using the one that came with the camera. We've got an LP6N battery here. We're going to talk about the battery life. This bag is kind of resistant, so that's not opening. Okay, and it should take LP6 batteries as well. So we've got this, which I have a million of. So we're going to check that out. Cool. And you get one of these things. Has anyone ever opened these? I've never opened one of these. I'm going to keep this sealed. We've got a camera strap so that everyone knows you're shooting with a Canon. Nice. Let's get rid of that. Put that down there. And I actually got a kit with a lens, so we'll get to the lens in a minute. This is what we really want to look at. We'll put this lens over here on the floor and we'll get going. So right now, and I've got a link in the description to the where we can buy this camera and get some more information about it. Right now in the US, the body alone sells for $1,200, like $1,199. I always call that $1,200. And let me know in the live chat or in the comment section where you're from and how much this body costs where you live. And I'm sometimes shocked at the difference in price between what the camera or the body costs in the US and then overseas. And the other thing that I found out is that it's not specific, it's not consistent. So on some cameras, we see a markup of like 40%, and then on some cameras, it's a markup of 15%. So I'm curious to know how much this body costs where you live, because that's obviously a deciding factor when we're looking at whether any particular camera is a good value or not. So as far as size, I'm going to tell you right now, I've been shooting with Canon for years. I love, like right away, I love how deep this grip is. It's super comfortable to hold. It's like super solid. I love that. I love the feel of a DSLR. I mean, there are definitely advantages to mirrorless cameras, but I love how this camera feels in my hand already. It's very similar in size. I mean, it's going to be smaller than a 5D. So this is the 5D. This is the 90D over here. It's smaller, but when you look at the grip, they both have very, very deep grips. So I'm really happy with this. Let's see. Yeah, it's super comfortable. I like what they did over here. It might be hard to see in the video. I'll talk about it more in my detailed review, but this sort of dips in, so it really rests on your hand, which again is important during very, very long shoots. Of course, it's a bigger body, no question. It's a DSLR. It's not a mirrorless camera. I'm going to go ahead and throw a battery in. So we've got the battery compartment right here, and there should be, let's see if that will work. Yes, maybe no. Yes. Okay. So now we've got a camera that's on. So we've got a fully articulating touchscreen. So for those of you who are familiar, you can turn it this way and lock it when you're not using the camera. Boom, you close it, and now it's not going to get scratched. If you're shooting from the hip, you can go ahead and have it pointed up, or anytime you're above the camera, if the camera is on the ground, anytime it's positioned below you. And then if you're shooting with the camera overhead, if you're trying to shoot over a group of people and you need to see how to frame it, it's super easy. This is definitely my favorite type of screen on the market right now. Other times where it's really useful is if I'm doing product photography and I'm on the side of the camera, I can just have the screen like this. So I'm over here. I don't have to walk to the back of the camera to frame my shot, or again, depending wherever I am, I can see that. When I'm using a gimbal, For video work, this is just awesome because a lot of time the back of the gimbal will have a motor that blocks the screen, and it's really nice to be able to have the screen offset to the side. And if I'm walking around someone, I can look at the screen while the camera is pointed in another direction. So this is, there's no question that this is a strength from Canon. I don't know why every company doesn't do that. This is also a full touchscreen, so I'll put the specs back up. It's a full touchscreen. With some other companies, you have a touchscreen just for focus. Like on some of the Sonys or some of the Fujis, you'll have it for the focus and the quick menu, but not the main menu. With Canon, you have full touchscreen functionality for absolutely everything. You never have to worry about whether it's just they're always so easy to use. So that's definitely a bonus. Let's take a look at. Let me see if I can. Hope I don't have a card in the camera, of course. Boom. So we'll go ahead and flip the mirror out of the way so you can see the sensor. Hopefully you can see it right there. It's a 32.5 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor, which is just a beast. A big upgrade from the 24 megapixel sensor that we see on a lot of the Canon cameras. So that's awesome. It's a ton of pixels. It's a ton of megapixels for an APS-C size sensor. So we might see some noise in lower ISOs in lower ISOs than we're used to here. So I'll just give you another look at the sensor. Or the mirror come back down? That's all right. We'll get it out of there. Boom. But ultimately, that's a huge upgrade, and I'm excited to see, just in terms of image quality. Like I said, I've used the camera, but more of a detailed comparison with some of the other sensors that we see. We've got dual pixel autofocus, which has been, a staple from Canon for years. It's so reliable for video. I know that I don't ever have to worry about it. I know that my face is detected. I know that I'm always in focus. It's going to track me as I move through the frame. I love the dual pixel autofocus system. And what's great about the 90D is that we're getting dual pixel autofocus in 1080p, which we get on all the Canon cameras that have it, but we're also getting it in 4K now. So on cameras like the M50, for example, or the SL3, you do have dual pixel autofocus in 1080p, but when you go to 4K, you're getting that vicious crop of 1.7x on top of the APS-C sensor crop, and you also lose dual pixel autofocus capabilities, and they're replaced with a contrast detection system, which it's just not as good. Like, there's no question. It's slower. It's not good in low light. So having dual pixel in 4K and 1080p while not having an additional crop is really, really nice. Super happy with that. We have both. So obviously the dual pixel, because this is not a mirrorless camera, the dual pixel autofocus system works in live view. So when you're using the screen on the back for photos or for video, so it's great that it works for both. And if you're using the viewfinder, this is a really, really nice optical viewfinder. It's got 100% coverage. And then you have 45-point autofocus system. They're all cross type. Now, that's great for a DSLR. If you compare it to a mirrorless camera, it's a lot less autofocus points than you'd get on an EVF, like even the M50, which doesn't have a ton of them, has a lot more than 45, and they cover a larger percentage of the sensor. So that is a little bit of a limitation of an optical viewfinder. Okay, so I also want to mention that there is face and eye detection. Of course, those work when you're using the dual pixel autofocus system. So for video and when you're taking stills. Now, if you want to use the viewfinder, we still have, we don't have eye detection. There is face detection, I believe, but there are a lot less focus points for it to work with. So it's not, from what I understand, I actually didn't try it through the viewfinder, but it's not as reliable. But using the live view, it's awesome. I mean, it's dead on, which again, this is what you'd expect. Keep putting your questions in. I'm going to answer them as soon as I get through all the specs. I just want to cover a few more things. We've got continuous or burst shooting at up to 10 frames per second, which is excellent. So the 90D also has some new tracking capability. So for continuous shooting, the tracking has been excellent. We did some tests with people running at the camera or riding a bike that have worked really well. As far as frame rate, we can shoot at 4K at 25 and 30 frames per second, again with no crop, full HD or 1080p at 25, 30, 50, 60, and then we get 100 and 120 frames per second, which we'll get to later on because that doesn't tell the whole story. As far as the battery, I already said it's an LPE6N battery. And so one of the advantages of a camera like the 90D over a mirrorless camera is that this camera is rated for 1,300 shots. If I look at something like the M50, I think it's rated for like 235 shots. So if you're shooting stills, I mean, it just crushes it. I mean, even my Sony a7 III, which has awesome battery life, I think it's rated for 700 shots or something like that, which again is awesome. I love that. But 1,300 shots, I mean, you can shoot with this all day, and I mean, you're good. Another option, another functionality that I love about a lot of the new Canon is in-body 4K time lapse. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I just posted a couple of days ago a sunrise time lapse, and that's literally me putting the camera down and starting a time lapse and sitting there for about 40 minutes, and it's done. It's ready to go in camera. I didn't have to do any post-processing. I just told it, picked an interval, picked how many shots I wanted, and that's it. Press start and went and sat and watched the sunrise. So that was just awesome. So 4K time lapse. It's got 1080p also, but I wouldn't ever shoot 1080p as a time lapse. I'd always use 4K. Even if I plan on using it in a video that's 1080p, I would still shoot in 4K and then downscale it in post, because there are a lot of advantages there's a lot of advantages. I can reframe the entire time lapse. I can add some lateral or vertical movement in post because I can have the frame move down, because 4K is 4 times the size of 1080p. So if you're going to shoot, just tip, if you're going to shoot a time lapse, just trust me, just always shoot 4K. Another new feature here is this autofocus joystick. So I'm gonna just try to hold that up so you can see it. It's great. You can use this to move the focus point around. And if you, of course, you can touch to focus and you can drag to focus, which is great, but sometimes you may not want to move your thumb all the way over. And just having this functionality, I love that. And every camera that I have that has this, I use it all the time. It's great. We've got, this camera also has a clean HDMI out. So if you want to use this camera for streaming, or if you just want to record externally, because like most DSLR and mirrorless cameras, there's a 30-minute recording time limit. So if you want unlimited recording, or not unlimited, but until you run out of space, you can go ahead and connect this to an external recorder. And because there's a clean HDMI out, well, it's easier to explain when there isn't a clean HDMI out. So when you look at on the back on the screen of any camera, you'll see the image, but then on top of it, you'll see the focus point. You'll see maybe information about your exposure, quick menu. So when you have a clean HDMI out, you still see that on the screen, but the signal that's being sent out of the camera is clean. So it's just the image. And that's what lets you, again, use it for streaming. And this would be an awesome streaming camera because the autofocus is absurdly good. You know you're going to be tracked. So if you want to stream in 4K now, no problem. This would be a great option. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And finally, the last thing that I want to mention is that this camera has weather sealing, which again is just a great feature. It's one of those things that I never really thought about in the beginning, but then once I had it, just knowing that I don't have to worry about the weather was a big deal. So let's see just a couple of questions before I move on. From Steven Spence, it says, I heard you can shoot in 25 frames per second in PAL. Can you verify that? Yes, you can. You can do that in 1080p and in 4K. So that's a great question. So since I talked about the things that I liked, one of the things that I dislike about this camera and a lot of the new Canon cameras is that they don't come with 24 frames per second. There's no option to shoot at 24 frames per second in 1080p or in 4K. So you can shoot in 25 frames per second and you're not going to see much of a difference, but in terms of matching footage from different cameras and depending on what your timeline is at, that just means that you need to be consistent. There could be some lighting option or issues also. So I don't know why Canon is doing this. Little flash we just found, a little button right here. It's super solid. So I'm not sure why Canon's removing 24 frames per second. I don't get the logic. I spoke with some people at Canon USA. They said that they don't know. They haven't heard anything from Japan. They're not sure. Now, Canon has removed that in its entry-level cameras, but obviously it's not removing it in like their higher-end cameras and cinema-level cameras. So I'm super interested at the logic. Like maybe there is something that none of us know, but I don't understand why you'd remove a legacy feature like that, unless you can I don't know if it's at the cost of something else. If it's the cost of 4K, maybe. I just don't see why you'd have a camera that can record at 25 and 30, but not at 24. Doesn't really make any sense to me. So if you want 24 frames per second, that is not something that you can do. Which, again, I don't get that. From Jose Perez, I've seen a few reviews that show the camera not focusing great when using the viewfinder and photographing fast-moving subjects. So that is true if you're trying to shoot at 10 frames per second. If you drop down to 7 frames per second, then it does a much better job. It also depends on how the subject is moving. So if the subject's moving across and staying essentially a very similar distance to you, it's going to do a much better job regardless. If the subject's coming straight at you, that's more challenging for the camera, of course, because that distance is affecting the focal plane much more quickly. And at 7 frames per second, it does a much better job, but you're giving up some frames per second there, a significant amount, 30%. So is this the best sports camera out there, no. But for what I normally shoot, it worked great. It really depends on what you shoot and what your needs are. So that's something to consider. If you're shooting sports primarily, this would not be the first camera that I would get. I'll take a minute and just say that if you're watching, if you're not a subscriber, you want more information about the 90D, other cameras, just hit that subscribe and notification buttons, which is the real subscribe button, and you'll get to see some more videos about cameras. All right, so from Michael, I'm sorry, but you people are nuts. How many people know the difference between 24 and 25 frames per second? So it's not so much about people knowing the difference. It's, again, I don't want to derail this live show. I'll just do a whole video about it. But the point is, my question is, why would you remove it? So we know the con, like you will lose clients because you removed it. Fact. And my question is, what did you gain by removing it? And if I could get an answer that would make sense, that's cool. From Doug, what is your boxer's name? So I think he's talking about this boxer. She actually passed away. That's Macy. That's Zoe. I have a new boxer now named Macy. Okay, so I want to just continue talking about this camera, and we'll get to some more questions. So keep putting them in the comment section. So the things that I like about this camera so far, obviously the large sensor. It's got great ergonomics, very comfortable to hold. I love that there's a dial here. I'll give you a closer view. There is a top dial right here, and then there's another dial back here. Here, I'll hold it this way so you can see. Nice, but the buttons are positioned really well up here. So you've got your AF button, your drive, ISO. Pretty much all the buttons that I would need are exactly in a super comfortable position. And, that's one of the advantages of a bigger camera, not just this one, but any bigger camera is, the manufacturer has more flexibility with how to position the buttons because they just have more real estate to work with. One of the limitations of mirrorless cameras, like I love my A6400, but it's fairly small. So it's limited in where the buttons could be and how comfortable it is to actually use them. Now, if you've watched any of my Canon camera reviews, any of them, you know that I love the touchscreen. You know that from an ergonomic standpoint and just an overall user experience standpoint, that's something that I super value because we're so used to using our cell phone and iPads and whatever we have that we're so used to the touchscreen functionality that when I look at a camera and I want to interact with it and I see something on the screen, I just want to click on it and be able to make the change. And sometimes it's actually more confusing on cameras that have partial touchscreen functionality because like I'm clicking on it to focus, but then I see a menu setting that I want to change and I can't click on it. And I don't understand why they do that. Like obviously the screen can detect touch. So I'm glad that Canon's been doing this for a year. I expect very soon all camera manufacturers will continue to do that. On the left side, we've got the dial mode or the mode dial. So we can, there's a little button right here that you press and then you can turn it and you can alternate between or toggle between all these different settings. And I like this button because you're not going to inadvertently change your setting, which is excellent. And of course, to put it in movie mode, you're going to go ahead and toggle right here, photo and movie, and then you got your start and stop recording button back here, which again it's just comfortable. It's back here towards where your thumb is going to be. So overall, I'm happy. We've got one card slot. I know some people complain about cameras that have one card slot. I always would rather have two, but I don't expect even at $1,200 to have two. This is not a it's not that you can't get professional results out of this, it's that this isn't designed to be a super pro camera where I expect to have 2 cards or 2 card slots. So that's just me. And I'm curious how many of you actually have a camera that has 2 card slots and whether you actually use them as backup. Let's go to just a couple more questions. In time-lapse mode, can the camera adjust exposure as the light changes going from daylight to night light? So that is from Claudio. And that's a great point. So when I was saying that I shot the sunrise in time-lapse, that's usually very difficult to do. It's called, because what you're doing is before the sun rises, it's pretty dark out. So in order to get any kind of image, you need to bring your exposure up. But then as soon as the sun starts coming up, your exposure changes constantly. And there's some tools that you can get that will help you do that. But with all the Canons, pretty much all the newer ones, there's a setting that says, do you want to have the auto exposure take the first shot and then keep that steady, so every other shot uses the same exposure, which sometimes you do, or do you want it to auto expose for every shot? And that's the one that I used for the sunrise. And again, if you go check it out on Twitter, check it out on my Twitter account, and you'll see it exposed every image perfectly. And it went all the way from being dark to the sunrise, and then the storm came, and then it got super dark. And I actually have a picture from that same day of a double rainbow. I'd never seen a full double rainbow before in my whole life. And I was watching my gear and it started raining, and I went and grabbed it and turned around, and there was this beautiful double rainbow that it was just amazing. And I'm almost, it was like a lesson, because I was so focused on the sunrise that I almost missed a beautiful double rainbow, full double rainbow behind me. So I have the sunrise, and then I have just an iPhone picture of the double rainbow. So go check it out. Okay. Is it worth, from Rick Kimotho, is it worth selling the 80D and getting this for photography? So there are some advantages in terms of image quality. Of course, you're going to get higher resolution. The autofocus system is going to be better. It's going to be significantly better in low light. My question as far as upgrading would be why you're upgrading. What is it about the 80D? And this is a topic that I try to cover in a lot of my videos. When you go to upgrade, ask yourself, why am I upgrading? And does this new camera provide the specific features that are making me upgrade? And is it worth the money? Am I upgrading for a feature that I'm going to use like 0.5% of the time? Or am I upgrading for a feature that I'm going to use 50% of the time? And you can see the value changes there. So yes, there are definitely reasons to upgrade to this camera. You can have more megapixels to work with. Again, the autofocus and the tracking is better in this camera. So yes, there are reasons to do it, but it's a longer conversation than just a yes or no as far as the value. Let me see if there's anything else. So I've got some questions for you, and I just like to know more about you. So again, whether you're watching this live or if you're watching the replay, go ahead and answer all of these or some of these questions in the comments. I like to get to know and engage with the community, and so I just wanted to throw some questions up there that will help facilitate some conversation. So I already mentioned I love the great ergonomics, both just in terms of handling and the functionality. Again, it's just a super comfortable, like as soon as you hold it, it's so comfortable. I love the fact that, we've got the articulating screen. Battery life of 1,300 shots is just awesome. I love, I usually buy additional battery, like of course I have a ton of these batteries, so that's not fair. But when I get a new camera that I don't have other compatible batteries with, I love having long battery life. Like I don't want to actually think about the battery at any point. So if I know that I can go and shoot all day, I'll probably still bring an additional battery just because something could go wrong. But I like not having to think about it. So that's a huge bonus. Other things that I like about this camera, again, 4K with no crop is going to be great. It means that when we use lenses, like especially APS-C lenses, I'm going to grab this one right here. So this is the 10 to 18. So when I use the 10 to 18 on the SL3, for example, I have the APS-C crop factor of 1.6x. So let's say if I'm shooting at 10, I'm actually getting a 16.5 field of view. But then I have to apply another 1.7x crop because the 4K is cropped on the SL3, which now takes it to whatever that ends up being, somewhere in the high 20s or low 30s. So you went from 10 to low 30s. What's great about the 90D is I don't have to do that. It's got the 1.6, so of course I accept that as a function of buying an APS-C sensor camera, but I don't have to apply. I'm actually going to get 16.5, which is super wide. So when you're vlogging, when you're hand holding the camera, you're getting a much wider field of view than you would, again, when shooting in 4K, than you would from like an M50 or from an SL3. And unlike the M50 or the M6 Mark II, which I'll be doing a live show about and reviewing soon, I haven't unboxed it yet, I can use this lens with this camera, but I need an adapter, and I'll need an adapter for my M6 Mark II. But because the 90D has an EF mount, it accepts EF and EFS mount lenses. I should have no problem. Boom, grab it. Oh, do have a problem because I have the adapter for the EFM mount on there. But there you go. Goes in directly. Again, if I wanted, here's the mount for the EFM mount. If I want to put an EFS or EF lens, that's what was on there. So that's why I ran into that issue. Let's get rid of that for right now. And yeah, so big advantage of the fact that I don't have to apply a crop factor for 4K. Again, 4K with dual pixel autofocus. So I can't emphasize enough how important. Like to me, when I'm buying a camera, like resolution is going to be there. The next thing on my list is autofocus. Like before frame rate, because it doesn't matter to me if a camera can shoot 4K if it's not in focus. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what it can do if it's not in focus. So for me, I don't care about low light performance. It's not that I don't care about it. It's that it's lower on the list for me than autofocus. I use autofocus all the time. I need continuous autofocus for video, and it needs to be reliable. Like it's either in focus or it's not. And if it's not, who cares about dynamic range? And who cares about low light performance? Who cares about anything? It's not in focus. I can't use that picture. It's only once it's in focus that now things like low light performance, dynamic range actually matter. Color processing, any of that stuff. None of that stuff matters if it's not in focus. So dual pixel autofocus in 4K and 1080p is great. Another awesome feature, or two awesome features about this camera, is that we have both a 3.5 millimeter mic input, which you can hopefully see, and a headphone jack. So if you're coming from the 80D you probably you're used to the to having a headphone jack. That's one of the things that differentiates it from a lot of other cameras, and that lets you monitor your audio. So it's a great feature to have if you're shooting interviews. Again, if you're doing a lot of video, it's great. Depending, like if you're shooting alone, like in this situation, it's not super helpful to me because I'm not going to wear headphones while I'm on camera, so I can't monitor my own audio. But when I'm shooting someone else, I can't tell you how many times you're shooting an interview, you come home, you throw your SD card in, download the files, you start watching, and then you hear something in the background. Maybe it was a refrigerator that was on, or a fan in another room, just something that you didn't notice while you're recording, and now it's a complete pain in the butt to try to correct it in post. Whereas if you had noticed it up front, you could have just taken care of it and gotten much cleaner sound. So while you can see the audio levels when you're recording on a lot of cameras, being able to actually hear and monitor the audio is huge. So that's definitely something that I like. So just a couple of comments from Graham Smith. This camera retails body only for $1,859 in Australia. Wow. Wait, is that US dollars? That can't be right. Is that right? Let me know if that's right. And then from, is it Hdmi 360? Have you ever used the Canon 100mm macro lens? I borrowed a 60mm macro lens from my friend, but I'd love to get my own. So if you're talking about this L series 100mm macro 2.8, yes, it's by far my favorite macro lens. That's it. That's like the end of the story. There are other options. The 60mm works great. If you're going to do a ton of macro work and you can afford this lens, a lot of times I bought this on sale. I wouldn't think twice about buying this lens. This is a beautiful lens. And if you're in the live chat, you see Tidal Gardens is one of my really good friends, has a channel on YouTube also. And it's a lot of stuff about coral and reef tanks. And you look at his channel, probably 95% at least of the footage is shot with this lens, and it's absolutely spectacular. So I wouldn't think twice about buying that lens if you can afford it. Again, if not, there are some other lower cost options, but it's a beautiful lens. From Modern Day Tech, I want to get that 100mm macro lens. Yeah, I mean it's a no-brainer if you're going to do macro work. Seriously, and I don't say that a lot on my channel. I'm not like so definitive about stuff, but there's like zero chance you'll be disappointed with that lens. It's so sharp. I think it's I think I got it for like $700, maybe 600. I don't know. It was on crazy sale, brand new. Or go, I bought it on B&H. Go ahead or buy used. If there's a trusted source, so you know that the lens is not damaged, go buy used even. But you will not be disappointed with the image quality. There's no chance. Okay. So some things that I did notice, and we touched on some of that before, is that I do like the autofocus better in live view for stills. So of course, again, you can shoot stills using the optical viewfinder, which is great. It really like puts you in the scene. This is a really nice optical viewfinder, but it doesn't use dual pixel autofocus. So if you want to get the best autofocus, you have to use the live view for stills, which I sometimes do anyways because I like to shoot from the hip. A lot of times I'm shooting on a tripod anyway. So, but in bright daylight, pretty much any LCD screen without a viewer is going to be challenging to see. And that's where the optical viewfinder is great. But for the best autofocus, especially for tracking, or if you want eye autofocus, you need to use live view. You need to use the LCD, and it works great. The eye, if you shoot portraits, eye autofocus is like a spectacular game changer. You don't have to worry about anything but framing your shot. A good question from Mirrorless NY is Canon's dual pixel autofocus superior to something like Sony's A6400 or A7 III? So that's a very good question. Let me think of how I want to answer it. Is it superior to it? I will say that for video, I've never had a problem with it, with Canon. It's been great. The advantage of something like the A7 III or the A6400, for example, for stills, it's much faster autofocus than what you're going to get through the viewfinder, which doesn't use dual pixel. It's faster anyway. It's like the fastest autofocus that there is. So the Sony's eye detection is like unbelievable. And for me specifically, in addition to just traditional, just like human eye detection, it also works on animals. So I photograph my dogs a lot, and a normal autofocus, like zone-based system, always focuses on their nose because it's close and it's closest to the camera. But the eye tracking and eye detection and tracking for animals on both the A7 III and the A6400, if you shoot animals, it's sweet. I mean, you just turn it on, boom, it just continuously detects their eye. It's awesome, and it works every time. And my dogs, one was a dark boxer, the other one is a lighter dog, and it nails it every time. So there are some advantages to Sony there, definitely. But for video, I love dual pixel. I'm actually using 2 cameras right now that use dual pixel autofocus. And I mentioned this already. I love the fact that I can use EF, all my EF and EF, so I want to take this 70 to 200, boom, I throw it on here. What's nice about an APS-C sensor camera is that when I need additional zoom, so if I take that 70 to 200, that 200 now becomes like a 320 in terms of field of view because I'm applying a crop factor to it. So it's nice when I'm trying to get closer to something. That's when the crop is an advantage. When you're trying to get wide, it's a disadvantage. But again, when I'm trying to get close, that's awesome. And then let's talk about some things that maybe I didn't love about this camera. So first of all, again, I mentioned 24 frames per second. Whether that matters or not to you, I just don't see any reason why they would take it out. And so that's, and I'm seeing some comments about that. And again, we'll talk about that more in another video. Whether that matters to you or not, it's gonna matter to a lot of people, and you're gonna lose clients over it. So don't do it. Other things that some people may not like about this camera is obviously it's bigger and heavier. So if you look at the M6 Mark II, it has a lot of the same specs. It's almost like it's the same exact camera, but mirrorless, and it's like half the weight. So it's also very small. So like I always look at functionality or at ergonomics and design and size that way. I like to find a balance between something that's comfortable to hold for an entire day and at the same time look at something that is lost my train of thought there. But something that is not too small at the same time. So that's something to look at. Okay. So as with other Canon cameras, the preamp for the input, it's not going to be the best. That's fine. It's just something that I accept. And if you look at some of my other videos, I have some solutions for how I get better audio. I would definitely recommend getting an external microphone rather than using the microphone that's built in. So here are a couple of options. Well, let's start with if you want to get a shotgun microphone, which is an excellent option. You can get something like the Rode Video Mic Pro Plus. This is my favorite microphone in their video mic lineup. I also have the Micro, which is a lot smaller. I use that on a lot of my smaller setups, so this is a great option. The DIGIC V-Mic 3 Pro, I think it's called. No, the V-Mic D3 Pro is also an excellent option. What I like about this is that it's got some really cool, well, I'll do a full review about it, but it's got a stepless gain dial back here, so you can actually have the microphone increase the value for you, the volume for you, without. So like the Rode has a plus 20 dB, which works great if you want a little bit more control. And there are also some other functionalities here that I like this slides back and forth so it doesn't hit your face when you mount it on the camera. So some great things about this mic, and I'll do a review about it just to give you some more information about it. Now, if you don't want to go with a shotgun mic, you can use something like the Rode Wireless Go. This is a tiny setup. Basically, let me see if I can just show you guys really quickly. It's two little tiny squares. That's it. One of them is a transmitter. One of them is the receiver. You mount one on the camera, on the hot shoe, one on the person. You can attach a lavalier mic to it, and you're getting awesome audio regardless of how far the person is from the camera. So this is a great option if you want something that's a little more powerful. I also use the Rode Link Filmmakers Kit, which again I'll talk about a little bit later. This is a little bit of a larger setup, but gives you some additional functionality. So that's definitely something that I would look at. And that's not specific to this camera. With any camera that I'm going to use, that's something that I'm going to want. And then, the optical viewfinder, you need to decide whether that's a plus or a minus for you. Like for me, I love being able to see the actual exposure that I'm going to get in the viewfinder. So I prefer an electronic viewfinder. Some people still like an optical viewfinder, and if you do, this is a great one. So, but again, I think that at this point, optical viewfinders are so good that they offer an advantage for me, definitely for how I use it. So, some questions that I have about this camera for the more detailed review is, for example, how is the image quality when I compare it to something like the SL2 or the SL3 or the M50. So obviously we have and then of course the 80D, which it replaced. So we have more megapixels. It's still an APS-C sensor, but this camera costs the SL3, I think costs like $600 right now, and here we're looking at $1,200. Now, there's a lot more to it than just that. But one of my questions is, how is the image quality going to be? Like, is it significantly better? And you know, are you going to get this camera instead of the Canon RP, which is about the same price, is a full frame mirrorless camera? You know, it depends also on what you have. I have a lot of lenses. I can use them on the RP with an adapter, which I have, and I do use, but it makes, you know, the adapters are fine. They're great. They definitely add functionality. But when you look at it, it makes every lens this much bigger. Like this much bigger. Every lens. So it's not a huge thing, but it's definitely something to consider, especially on the longer lenses, or when I'm trying to balance a camera on a gimbal and every lens becomes a lot longer. So, you know, that's an issue. There's some advantages for the mirrorless camera because you can use a speed booster and get almost a full frame sensor field of view. So, you know, there's an advantage there. But, you know, it's a good question. I'm curious what you think. Would you get the RF instead of, the RP instead of the 90D? Something else that I don't love about this camera, you know, since that's where we are, 120 frames per second, which is a great feature. It's actually one of the main reasons why I even tried Sony. Well, not tried because I tried them, but why I actually got a Sony camera, I got the A7 III first, was because I wanted 120 frames per second. I wanted it. I like slow motion. I love slow motion. If you watch my videos, I like it. I use it. It's great. And Canon just doesn't offer it in any consumer camera in full HD or 1080p. So I could go buy a C200 and it's huge and it would be great, but I want it in a smaller form factor. So there is 120 frames per second for slow motion, but, and this is why specs don't tell you the whole story. And if you just read the specs, they don't say this, there's no autofocus. So I guess if you're shooting slow motion of something that's not moving away or towards the camera, it would work. Yeah, there's no autofocus. I'm not sure how I would use that. I mean, you can use it. It's just going to be super challenging. You have to be a lot more careful about maintaining the same distance from your subject. So if your subject is moving, like if someone's walking towards you, you have to stay the exact same distance to keep them in focus. Whereas it'd be great to just say, okay, the camera is taking care of that for me like it does in video in general. So that's a problem for me. I don't like that. So that's going in a dislike comment or column. Let me see if I have any other comments here. So from Mirrorless 7 or Mirrorless NY, 701 grams. It's heavier than Sony's A7 III full frame. So of course, you know, because it's a DSLR. And by the way, for those of you who don't know the difference between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera, so there's a mirror right there. Let me see if I can show it to you. It's right there. It's right in front of the sensor. It's at 90 degrees. And when you take a pic, so that mirror reflects the image up the body, and then there are two more mirrors over here, and then that reflect the image out here through the optical viewfinder. So when you take a picture, that mirror flips out of the way. The shutter closes or opens and closes, and then the mirror comes back down. When you're shooting video, the mirror just locks out of the way. So here I'll boom, and I'll get the mirror out of the way, and now you can see the sensor. And if I switch back to photo, the mirror comes back down, get it out of the way, boom, and you can see the sensor. So that's what happens when you take a picture. So because of that, you need specific distance here you need space here for the mirror. And that's what makes the body wider or deeper. And then you also need room inside the actual camera for this entire mechanism for the image to be transmitted up or reflected up and then back out to the camera. So it makes the whole body bigger. Now in a mirrorless camera, obviously, so let's grab an M50. That's it. You open it and here's the sensor. There's no mirror. So the sensor, look at how close it is to the flange. That's why when you want to use an EFS mount lens with a mirrorless camera, the size of the adapter, what the adapter is actually doing is it's moving the lens far enough from the sensor so it's the same distance as it is from this sensor, because the lens is designed to focus on the plane of the sensor from a specific distance. And if you're able to, even if the mount actually worked and you can put this lens directly on an M50, it wouldn't ever focus. So what this adapter does is it actually moves the lens far enough out so it's the same distance as it would be from this body when we're talking about distance from the sensor. So essentially what you're doing is, even though this body is smaller, you're adding the size over here instead of to the body itself. What's really nice about Sony, for example, is that it's the same mount on all the mirrorless cameras. So you're not running into that issue. There are other issues with Canon or with Sony. I discussed some of them in my other videos, but definitely overall really happy with my A7 III and my A6400. Let's see if we've got any other questions. So which do you prefer, the Canon 90D or the M6 Mark II? So that's going to come down to preference. I probably like the M6 Mark II better. You know, in terms of functionality, it's the same, but they're similar. Again, except for I get dual pixel, I get eye detection using the viewfinder, which is awesome, which is something I'm not getting here. So depending on what I was going to shoot, so like if it's sitting on a tripod and I'm shooting talking head, it doesn't really matter. I'm not, either way, I'm getting dual pixel. The screen's going to flip. I probably like the handling of a bigger camera better. But if I'm traveling and I want something that's more portable, if I'm going to do street photography, well, then I'm going to like the M6 Mark II, knowing also though that the battery is not going to be anywhere near what I'm getting from the 90D. So that's really the only downside. But if you watch any of my M50 videos, I actually have a video dedicated to the battery performance issues with the M50, and I would use the same solutions with the M6 Mark II. So let me just scroll up here and see if I see any other comments from Modern Day Tech. My G30 has 2 slots and I only use it as an additional storage. I don't use it as a backup. So that's interesting, and sort of what I expected. From Mark Anthony Velarde, Fuji X-T2 or the Canon 90D. Always depends on what you're going to do. I love the image quality from the X-T2. It's an amazing camera. If I was going to shoot video, I would get the 90D. End of story. The autofocus here, the continuous autofocus for video, is better than the X-T2. End of discussion as far as I'm concerned. But if I'm only doing street photography, for example, I really love the image quality that I get out of the X-T2. Both Canon and Fuji have wonderful color processing. Fuji also has some awesome film simulation modes that I think are better than Canon's. So if that's something that you're interested in, like you're not, if you're using it for photography, you're gonna love the X-T2. it's a beautiful camera. I actually just reviewed the X-T30 if you want to check that out. Then my favorite camera of last year was the X-T3. That camera I think is so underrated. What you get value-wise on the X-T3, I mean it's out of this world. It's an amazing camera. So if you're interested, check out my X-T3 and X-T30 reviews. I think you're gonna like what you see there. So from Savage 1776, honestly, at this price point, you can get a used 6D Mark II or the Canon RP, or better yet, throw an extra $300 and get a used Canon R. Nothing against the 90D. I still have my 80D. You know, I'm not going to argue that. Those are super valid points, and it's an interesting price point for Canon to drop a DSLR in. I can, it's very interesting to see what Canon is doing, because with their pricing, they're not leaving a lot of room for where they can introduce new bodies with competitive advantages. So if you make this camera super inexpensive, no one's buying the lower end cameras. But when you price it this high, the question is who's buying this and not the RP? Probably someone who doesn't want to invest in RF lenses. But on the other hand, that's what you want people to do. You want to move them to the new mount. So yeah, the pricing of this camera is a little baffling. Although if it had 120 frames per second with autofocus, yeah, I wouldn't care. I'd get it. I have all the lenses that I need. That in and of itself, if I had uncropped 4K and 120 frames per second with autofocus, I would buy it. But I also think that should be on the RP, but that's neither here nor there. Let me see if there are any other questions that I missed. A tanker of a battery, yep. So from Sadamo de Beers, I'm the worst with names. I'm terrible with names. So when I'm reading them, I'm awful. We'll do this view for now. Are you using a Stream Deck for streaming? Yes. So I have a Stream Deck right there, and then I can use my different scenes. So if I want to show you this view or this view, or this view or this view, I can do that using the Stream Deck. If I want to ask you to subscribe, I don't usually ask a ton for you to subscribe, but if you like what you see and you want to join the community, I'd go ahead and do it. So yes, that's when you see me reaching out here. That is what I'm hitting. Wonder if any manufacturer will make a full frame 12 megapixel BSI backside illuminated IBIS camera. I don't know. Yep, 4K 30 no crop sounds good. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about as far as this camera. I see some new from Ashik Ahmed. I was talking about the DIGIC 8 processor. So that's obviously Canon's newest processor. Of course, it's implemented in this camera. And it contributes to functionality such as the higher frame rate, the improved speed of autofocus and tracking. There's also an improvement in auto exposure functionality of this camera that's going to be meaningful. And as far as just the overall functionality of the camera, startup, changing modes from photography to video, going to playback, and then previewing images and video. The DIGIC 8 has been really good. I've been happy with it on all the cameras that I have that have it. Are there any GoPro mic adapter knockoffs that work for the Hero 7? I am not sure. That's from 3 Cubed. But that's probably will belong in one of my GoPro videos. which should I do a GoPro Hero 8 video? Should I do one of those? I think I should probably do one of those. I will do one of those. That's coming out soon. So I think that pretty much sums it up. I want to thank everyone who joined me. Again, thank you for everyone who has supported me on either a super chat or on Patreon. So again, thank you. And I hope this gave you a good first impression unboxing of the 90D. Of course, in a couple of weeks after I've used it, because like I said, I've only used it for a few days. And I like to really put a camera through everything that I do with a camera before publishing a review. So in a couple of weeks, you'll see a more detailed review. And then let me know in the comment section, which camera would you like to see comparisons with? So I'm already thinking the RP is going to be one of them. Maybe the Canon XT30, maybe the Sony a6400. There are a few options there that I think I'm going to put up against this camera, and it'll be interesting to see who wins. And definitely the M6 Mark II. I think that's a natural comparison there. From FSA Entertainment, you're a fan from India. Love your camera reviews. Thank you so much. Very, very grateful for all the support and for you watching all the way from India. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for watching. And you know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.